Did you record everything on the CD by yourself?
Yes, I did record everything by myself for the third CD. You have to remember that by the third CD I was doing improvisation, guitar loops, and guitar done on the fly, really. And as a result, as far as recording, I didn't need any assistance at all, really. Because it was really a simple matter of checking the levels, making sure they were okay, and then turning on the recorder and playing. Because it was a live recording. So I did record everything by myself for the third CD, and in fact, for every CD that I've ever done. It's just that way. It's not that I'm a big do-it-yourselfer, at all. It's just, for me, it's what has worked, and also what opportunities I had. I didn't have engineers to help me and a big studio to work in at all. This is all just what I could come up with.
This cover was a little bit different than the others. It was black and white, a little bit raw. Was that on purpose?
I'm glad you mentioned that, because yes, the black and white cover for the third CD was on purpose. And it was because the third CD was an attempt to combine standard rock with guitar loops, which is what I had tried to do with the third CD. And to complement that was definitely the CD cover. And using a black and white cover was a little raw, it wasn't full of colors and those kinds of things. And I thought that then just a red title would work very well. And in fact, it was a series of 3 photos, and originally those photos were going to be the cover of the first CD. At the time, that's all I had was a black and white camera, and so I had just taken pictures of a studio that was really in an apartment where I'd recorded my first CD. So I kept those pictures, and remember the first CD I found a different picture that my friend had made. But I thought, gosh, it's perfect for this third CD because I want it to be a little raw, and very, very minimal, not very fancy at all. And I thought black and white photos would work very well. And the series of 3 photos is basically my cat, Spatzo, who I also call Spoonsiitis at times, was in the studio room underneath the desk, surrounded by all these wires and things, which is true to life. When you record, it takes a lot of cables. So he's surrounded by cables, and the first photo has him looking up at the camera, and by chance the second photo actually has him walking out of the studio, which is the photo on the inside of the CD. And then the third photo is the same picture as the front photo, except that he's looking away rather than looking towards the camera. And so I thought those 3 series are the photos, that are in the third CD, and that's exactly what happened. And I think it worked out very well. It's a little odd, I guess, to have a cat on the cover, but it seemed to work well for the CD and give the representation of being a little raw, and a little less produced and maybe more rock than my previous efforts.
Your style seems more refined. Did you work on that style for this CD specifically?
Well, that's a complicated question because I would say yes, I did certainly work on that style specifically. By that time, I was doing guitar and guitar loops, exclusively, trying to develop a style, using that, doing all improvised material on the spot, and recording it live with no overdubs. And I've done that ever since my second CD all the way to the present, with every CD. So in that way, I certainly did work on a style specifically. On the other hand, for the third CD, I didn't say, okay, I'm going to record the third CD, so I'm going to work on this style. It wasn't that way at all. In fact, when I put out a CD, it is for the reason that my style has evolved, okay, or changed in some way, or expanded, from my previous release. And that is a natural process, really, that as you play, over time, you discover certain things and you get used to certain ideas and that kind of thing. And as a result, your guitar style certainly changes naturally, and you start creating different sounds. And that's the thing. If you look back to all of my CDs, even from the first one to the present, every CD is very different, and yet it's still the same style overall, but certainly it's changing and going in different directions. And that is because I never really set out to say, okay, I'm going to release an album, I'm going to record an album specifically. Rather, over time, as I keep playing and recording, I record things, I listen back, and I realize, oh gosh, my style has really changed. It's gone in different directions. I'm using different sounds or a different approach to guitar and that kind of thing. And it's a really great way to figure out when is a good time to release a CD, because it really chronicles your development on guitar and your evolving style, the style that you're creating. And so that's the way I've approached recording and releasing albums.
In what way is this CD similar to the second?
Well, the third CD is similar to the second CD in the sense that it is the next step in the style that I was trying to create using improvisation. In other words, improvising, the entire song, not just within the song, but the song itself. In other words, just turning on the recorder and playing, and hopefully, things will work out and sound structured, even though they really aren't. And so it's an evolution of that, and also my use of guitar loops, and regular guitar, and combining those. So in that sense, it is very similar to the second, and I started that with the second album. So this is the next step, further down in this journey of this evolving style. It's the next phase, if you like. By that time, I was a lot more comfortable using guitar and guitar loops and improvising as well. In fact, I don't even recall, thinking, my second CD, I was thinking, gosh, I'm improvising, that's a big deal. And for my third CD, it wasn't that way at all. By that time, I was used to it. It's just the way that I did it. So certainly just the next step in the evolution of my style.
In what ways is this CD different than the second?
Yes, certainly. The third CD is different as well from the second CD in a couple of areas. One area is that the second CD was very moody and very introspective, and I think I was doing that very much at the time, musically. And it's a very, if you listen to it, a pretty dark and introspective, mysterious kind of CD. Whereas my third CD is much more in your face in a way, very much more of a rock CD. You know, the first 3 or 4 tracks are certainly that. Though certainly, not getting rid of any kind of melody or anything like that, but just in its approach was certainly with rock in mind. And I think you can certainly hear that in the tracks, and in that way it's very different than the second CD. Also, I think that certainly I was getting better at mastering, so it sounds a little different than the second CD. And another thing is that the drum sounds are vastly improved compared to the second CD. And again, that was a conscious effort to try to make the drum sounds sound more realistic by mixing 2 drum machines together, and really focusing on that. Whereas on the second CD, there are drums, but they're in the background. They're certainly not a focus of the music, and don't play a big role, and don't sound very realistic at all. Whereas on the third CD, I think it's a drastic change, because the drum sounds sound more real, more realistic, and in that way it's very different. Also, I think that the third CD goes in many directions, whereas the second CD was a little more focused in being introspective sounding.